Hello and welcome to Crash Course Boringness. This is probably going to be a very boring episode of Crash Course because it's about the home front of Germany and other countries in World War One. So yeah, if you fall asleep, we're not offended because this is going to be really, really boring. So we're going to start with Germany just because we want to. So anyways, there are many open jobs because of all the men enlisting in the army, right? So because of that, they had to find replacement people to fill those jobs. And so women and children were not treated equally in the workforce. But the reason that children or youth were able to work in the workforce was the fact that there were no teachers, some of the teachers enlisted in the army, so therefore they weren't able to teach the students. And because of that, schools just didn't have enough teachers to teach all the students. So those students were then left to do what they wanted in the day because there was no reason for them to go to school. So instead of going to school or hanging out with their moms or their parents because their parents were either fighting a war or they were working in factories to make money, so they were also able to, as well, go out and fill jobs. And some evidence of this is seen so from 1914 to 1918, youth employment in the chemical branch in Germany increased by 225%. Another example is the increase of youth employment of 97% in the steel industry, and then also a 95% increase in machinery. So there's lots of evidence here that those kids did go fill many jobs, and they obviously did them well because it was from 1914 to 1918. And then the men going to war also did end up resulting in a loss of income for families as well, simply because of the fact that the women who did go for replacement jobs were often paid half or even less than half the amount that men doing the same job would have received. So that discrimination caused a problem there. And despite the women's roles in filling these jobs during the war and the major role they played in keeping guns loaded, etc., whatever, on the front, they still gained very little to any respect in the working field. And an example of this is the fact that when all the men returned from war, or those left, I guess you could say, when they returned, the women that took their jobs were immediately fired, gotten rid of, and the men got their jobs back. So another problem was the shortage of food. So the shortage of food was because of the fact that all the food was being sent to feed the army, the cavalry, the horses, and the men. So because of all that food being needed to feed them, there was nothing left for the civilians at the home front. So basically, this made it. So the food shortage led to bad health conditions, mainly because of malnutrition. And this malnutrition increased the death rates of malnutrition. You can laugh in the audience if you want, I don't care. So in France, and the men, like in all the other countries, they fought all the battles, but that doesn't mean that the women and children at home didn't face many problems. One of the main problems was the fact that the women and children who were living in the towns and cities close to the front line, all those towns and cities were in range of enemy artillery fire, so they were often killed by the German bombardments. And also, they were also killed in factories as well, not by Germans or people attacking, but simply because of the fact that in those factories, there were many accidents. That's simply because of the fact that safety was not a priority or a concern, usually, when making munitions or constructing things for the war, because they wanted to make as many as they could, as fast as they could. So safety was usually second concern, and the amount made was the priority. And the people who lived in German-occupied territory didn't get off easy either, because of the fact that they were usually, the Germans who were occupying this territory, in some cases, raped and used them as free labor during the war because they wanted to take advantage of them in a way to strike fear into them. So they were not treated well there either. And also, like in other countries as well, women and children did fill those jobs, but they were paid less because they were discriminated against, which is, apparent through multiple home fronts across the war. And another thing the Germans did to put fear into the French that they controlled in the German-occupied territory, or the French land that was occupied by the Germans, was that they would publicly examine them in just another form to strike fear into them and make them, compliant. Okay, so now we're going to move on to England. And the home front of England especially saw many changes, and this was simply because of the fact that at the start of the war, everyone in England was very patriotic. They were hopeful because they were all told that the war would be over by Christmas 1914. So that made everyone very, excited for what the result would be, because they were like, this will be easy, we're going to be in and out, it's going to be done. But that hopefulness quickly turned to hopelessness because of the fact that they got the news of all the massive death tolls and the threat of Zeppelin bombings and German U-boats, et cetera, all took them from a state of happiness and hopefulness to a state of just flat-out sadness and depression. But that's not all that changed. That was how they emotionally changed. But economically, they kind of changed the same ways that every other country that we've covered changed. And the fact that since all the men were fighting the war, instead of working in factories, the women and children then took their place in the factories. And like in France, many accidents happened in these factories as well because of safety not being your number one priority and concern. And there are many examples of this. And another problem, though, was just like in some of the other countries, food prices dramatically increased because of the fact that all the food was needed to feed the army, et cetera, all the people in the army. And that's England. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the United States. And unlike some countries, the United States just went into full total war mode. And when I say that, all they could think about was how can we support the war, what can we do to make it so we have a better chance of winning. And this started when on June 5th, 1917, Wilson called for men from 21 to 31 to sign up for the war. And an example of how much people wanted to win the war is the fact that in North Carolina alone, more people registered than they actually believed lived there. So if they believed 500,000 people lived there, 1 million signed up. So yeah. And another way people supported the war was they bought war bonds and war stamps to help out the government and just give them more funds to work with. And they were also in a way to bribe them, I guess you could say, or to encourage them to buy these. The government promised that they would get their money back, plus a little extra after the war, so there was some encouragement there to do that. And also, people had Liberty loans, and this was used to raise money around the country. And another thing they did to raise money was towns and cities had quotas, and if they raised the proper things if they raised enough money and supplies to fill that quota, then they got certain flags that marked them as, more patriotic than others. And another thing people did was they would have something called a victory garden. So instead of buying their food, they would plant their food and grow their own food. And this reinforced that wasting food was not what you wanted to do, and you wanted to use all your food as well as you can. And another thing they did on the home front was they rationed food. So you got your ration cards, stuff like that, and that was how you got your meals throughout the month or week or however long they lasted. Another thing they used to try to reinforce the need to save food was wheatless Mondays, so you wouldn't eat bread and stuff like that on Mondays. Meatless Tuesdays, so no steak, etc. I guess you could say on Tuesdays, and then porkless Thursdays and Sundays. So that was all just more ways of reinforcing the need to save and help the people at the front. And then another thing that happened in America was that German Americans were suddenly discriminated against, and they were always suspected of being spies simply because they're German and were fighting the Germans. So there was a lot of discrimination there as well. And then finally, factories and mines, like everywhere else, they were used to help the production of war goods. And just like in France, etc., all those other places, the same things happened where the men went to fight the war, the women took their places, and so the children, etc. So in that regard, the war kind of affected the home front the same everywhere. And that is the U.S. So that concludes the episode of Crash Course Boringness on the home fronts of World War I. Hopefully you had a nice nap during the video, because I know you probably slept through it, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye. Okay, let's go.